Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. My name is Clayton, also known as George Pig, and I manage the community here at Refold. In today's episode, I've got Tom, a linguist from the Netherlands, and we discuss regional languages in the Netherlands. We discuss language models like ChatGPT, and we also discuss a couple of things that I want to educate you about. So we discuss Neger Hollands, which, despite the unfortunate name, is the name of a Creole language formerly spoken by primarily Black people, based on Dutch lexically. We also discuss different ethnic groups in South Africa and Afrikaans, and particularly we discuss the colored ethnic group. And colored in the context of South Africa is the preferred sort of name for an ethnicity, mostly in Western South Africa and parts of Namibia. So you might hear these terms and not understand them outside of these contexts, but I did want to go ahead and preempt that by telling you about them and why we use them. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. It was a very fun one for me. All right. And Tom, thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to give a brief introduction, who you are, what your background with languages is, your relationship to the language learning community?
Okay. Thanks for having me. So I'm Tom. I'm from the Netherlands. I study physics and linguistics, and well, only for about 1 month now, and then I should be finished with both. I'm not a student anymore then. Can't wait. And my relation with the language learning community. Honestly, I feel like it's not really one community, because every language has its own community, I guess. And of course, there are people who are doing multiple languages and want to talk about multiple languages at once, and there's places for that. So those communities are broader. And then there are, of course, languages that people don't necessarily learn, but they just want to know about. Like many people are interested in Japanese because they like anime, but they wouldn't really learn Japanese. And so is it a language learning community or a language enthusiasm community?
That is a good point. So regarding how I met you, I know you from sort of the Dutch adjacent circles, so other Low Franconian varieties, Low Saxon, stuff like that. And that's sort of where I got to know you, as you were sort of the only person with a formal linguistics background in some of these otherwise Afrikaans speaking communities.
Yeah. So Low Franconian, well, Dutch is my native language, my first language. And Low Saxon, well, that's my mother speaks Gronings.
Okay, so she's from the northeast of...
the north of the Netherlands, the northeast. That's her first language, and she speaks that with her family always. So I grew up with this language, just learning it passively, because I grew up in the south of the Netherlands where this doesn't exist. And so she always spoke Dutch to me.
Is Normal from Gronings? Are they from that area?
No, well, that they are from I don't know, but not Achterhoek. No, so that's the more like the middle of the country and then to the east. Yeah, but they are well known also outside that area.
Yeah, they're really the only low sort of Low Saxon stuff that I'm familiar with, I think.
Yeah, well, they're a bit older. It's, I think, from the 70s.
Yeah, they've got a few songs, and I don't claim to speak obviously Low Saxon, but I find that it's fairly intelligible to people who speak Afrikaans or Dutch. So,
well, it depends. It depends really on who's listening. My mom told me she used to have a boyfriend from the south of the Netherlands who couldn't understand any of it. And now her husband is from the south of the Netherlands and he has no problems with it. So, yeah, she says, yeah, it also depends on your own attitude, I guess.
I think it depends on the listener's attitude to the language,
And
how much they
talent.
want to reach for um, mutual intelligibility. There's sort of an example of, sometimes speakers who speak the prestige variety
Hmm.
do not want to reach for it and try to understand. There's definitely some social stuff at hand when it comes to, sort of regional languages that may not carry prestige. You know,
Hmm. Well, that matters a lot. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah. So,
Although, oh,
go ahead.
my grandma um, is really even more than my mother speaks Low Saxon primarily, and she does speak Dutch, but she's 100 years old now, so
Oh,
she's really like really from a time when Low Saxon was the language you spoke everywhere, and nowadays it's not really normal anymore to ask people things in Low Saxon in stores, for example. That's become really, yeah, you got to know them to do it. So what I was going to say, she sometimes finds it difficult to understand Dutch from people who are not from nearby. It's different accents of Dutch. And then I would also say, yeah, in part it's kind of true that she really doesn't understand, but she's also not. She doesn't care about it. She wouldn't really do that much effort. Sorry, Grandma. But
oh yeah.
yeah,
There's
that does matter too. And that's not so. Then it's not the prestige thing. It's something else.
Yeah, well, there's something called covert prestige as well. I don't know if that concept
Yeah.
applies here. Maybe she doesn't want to understand um, Gronings accented Dutch.
Yeah.
People have their own reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so people may not be aware. The Netherlands is quite linguistically diverse. Uh, you know, Dutch itself, under the umbrella of Low Franconian, has a lot of varieties, and some are not mutually intelligible with each other. Um, you know, and then you also have the non-Dutch languages spoken in the Netherlands. So you've got West Frisian, and then you've got Low Saxon up in the north.
Yeah. And I think Limburgish is Low Franconian, but it's also considered officially by the government considered a regional language. So could be
Okay.
considered as something similar to Low Saxon. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Netherlands is actually surprisingly linguistically diverse. And I've heard many L2 Dutch speakers bemoaning it because they learn AN and that they don't have the same exposure to regional varieties of Dutch that a native speaker would. And it can be quite confusing, quite difficult. And that's not even getting into Belgian varieties or
I was going to say.
Surinamese varieties. And believe it or
Yeah.
not, we have a couple of varieties native to America.
Yeah. 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 Oh, what was it called again?
There was Mohawk Dutch, Jersey
Mhm.
Dutch,
Jersey Dutch is
Pella
what.
Dutch.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Pallet Dutch. Yeah.
And I think Pella Dutch is the only one that's still alive.
Yeah, yeah, I saw some video of two old guys talking Pella Dutch, which it sounded like relatively like standard, but
Mhm.
yeah, with some
That
American
it sounded like
influences.
American accented.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think I've
yeah,
seen that video. He's talking about a red box. He's like a Roy Buck or something, and uh, two elderly guys. But
yeah.
Jersey Dutch, I've read a couple of papers on it. It's quite divergent, quite different. Um, and then you also get into the non-Dutch varieties of kind of Dutch but not Dutch. Like you get into Afrikaans with all of its varieties, and there were a couple of Dutch Creoles spoken in like Indonesia and
Mm-hmm.
South
Oh
America.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But a lot of it is dead or at least not findable anymore.
For some reason, there's a very active Neger Hollands, is what they call it, uh, community online, and I've never figured out why. Um, there's a server on
Hmm.
Discord full of enthusiasts for it, which more power to them. But I don't think it has any speakers live. Um, and it's one of the more interesting things I've seen. I think it's run by a sort of an eccentric German guy. So
Yeah. I've seen that guy. Yeah, he's in a bunch of servers. I'm not in the Neger Holland server, but uh, he makes videos and he's really going for it. Yeah, what motivates him? I don't know. The language is extinct as far as I know.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah.
and yeah, it's such an
And what is
unfortunate name too.
it is a very unfortunate name. It's sort of a bad name, but it is what it is, and that's at least what the English Wikipedia calls it. So, but definitely don't use that word outside of that context. I think for
No,
any of the listeners.
no.
Um, Now, what is it like learning these closely related languages? So, obviously, I'm assuming you speak AN, sort of standard Dutch as your native language. What's it like learning, Low Saxon, or what's it like learning Afrikaans?
Yeah. Well, do I speak AN? That's the first question because I'm from the south, from
Okay.
Eindhoven. So I, of course, am from a city, and then it's typical that you do speak like a kind of standard Dutch. But yeah, there are so many things in both my accent and um, vocabulary, and probably also just grammatical things. Well, probably definitely that I do that are not considered normal in the west of the country. Um, More than enough that people will notice it, but not enough that people would um, think I don't talk normally. It's
Mhm.
yeah, it's like you're from the south, yeah, and then the conversation continues. So that's
And do you want
also
to elaborate on what features those are?
oh well, yeah. Um, you know, it's there's a it how do you what's the term again? So there's some kind of diglossia going on in Eindhoven where there are people who speak the Brabants dialect and there are people who speak more or less there are people who speak standard Dutch because not everyone is from the region. Um, and then of course I'm somewhere in the middle because I did not grow up with Brabant's parents. My father is from Eindhoven, but his parents are not. So he already he has the southern accent, but not the like the true dialect. Um, but even for me, there is some kind of continuous thing going on that with my friends I speak differently than in a store or in a to a police officer or something like that. And if I
Okay, so you sort
leave
of
the region, yeah.
you code
So
switch between something more like a regional variety of Dutch and something closer to standard Dutch,
yeah,
depending on
or
the
at least
situation.
there are registers which interact with aspects of the dialects. Of course, everyone has registers in which they speak, but they're much more like the colloquial registers, very much more close to some kind of dialect. Yeah. So then you have like there's the word kei, which is something like which what literally means it's a rock, and kei is a boulder or a stone. Yeah, well, like a stone that you can hold, let's say. But we use this like as an intensifier, like something can be kei goed, kei mooi. It's very normal to do this almost everywhere, and this is I would yeah. So I would in whatever register I would use this word in Eindhoven, but then when I went to study in Leiden, I used it. People were like, "Kei, yeah, that's nice. You're from the south." So then you learn that you cannot use this word as much here if you don't want commentary. Um, yes, so yeah, that's a really typical just a word. Um, and not everyone notices my accent, but in the West it's very common to have an
Some people
R.
don't.
Hmm?
Some people just don't notice accents.
Yeah,
Some
some
people do.
some don't. Some are really sharp about it, but some just don't notice at all. But something like the R at the end of a syllable.
The famous Hoysa R.
Yes, Gois, or the Leidse R is the same R. And now I lived in Leiden for like 8 or 9 years. 9 years. So I kind of adopted this R. It's really inevitable. If you live there long enough, you start doing it. But if I'm back
As an American, I'm a fan of the sound.
of course, but if you come back in Eindhoven and you use this R, then you also get comments like, "Oh yeah, you're a student. You're from Leiden now. You're not Eindhovens anymore." So, because in Eindhoven we have the kind of sound at the end.
Okay, so it's sort of I guess is it like a fricative, a uvular sound, maybe?
Yeah, or a trill, but voiceless. Or trill, at least. Yeah,
it does sound voiceless to me. Which is interesting. There's a lot of variation in the Dutch rhotic, by the way. I'm sure you know this, obviously, as a student of linguistics and a language geek yourself. The Dutch rhotic sound varies a lot.
Oh yeah. Oh, there are like, I think that I read a paper. There's like 21 different ways to say it.
Yeah, that does not surprise me.
Yeah.
And then thankfully Afrikaans just has 2, right? They've got the uvular fricative, and then they've got the I guess the alveolar tap.
Yes, and then the fricative is not even considered standard or not proper.
It's sort of they call it the brei.
Yeah. Is it? Yeah, now I'm not sure because there's the Dutch word is.
I think it's associated with the West.
Yeah, brei. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's associated with rural West Cape people, but I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Typical for colored people is what they would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And actually, Link, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's sort of a language learning service, sort of like an assisted dictionary type thing. I was reading some Afrikaans recently, just testing out Link, and I was pleasantly surprised to see some colored representation in this book I was reading. I saw some dialectal Afrikaans. They spelled the speaker who was supposed to be colored. She said kinders as kanders or something in the spelling. So it had the glide, and then it had a different vowel. So it was like the E with the cappy on it. And I was like, yeah, this is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, great. Yeah, because there many Afrikaans people feel that the ones who care about language feel that Afrikaans is being threatened by English, and the first thing that they'll think of is then English vocabulary in Afrikaans. That's wrong. That's bad. We should not do that. And very often I will also see that these things are actually French loanwords that we also have in Dutch that then also exist in English. And then they say, no, we cannot do this. We need to get a real Afrikaans word.
There's a purist streak in Afrikaans.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's very old already. It's like 50 years ago already people were saying these things. I read a paper about that.
One of my favorite examples of that is favorite. In English and Dutch, we say favorite or favoriet or something.
Yeah.
But they use a purist word. They use gunsteling or something.
Gunsteling, yeah. Gunsteling. Yes, and it makes sense if you say that to a Dutch person, but it also sounds like a kind of dated word. I imagine. Yeah, weird. Oh, gunsteling. Mijn gunsteling sounds really posh, exaggerated. Yeah. What was my point with this? So I've
heard that at least people from Cape Town, the Cape Colored community, they use a lot of English words. They code switch a lot compared to other speakers of Afrikaans.
Yeah.
And what makes me happy about seeing colored Afrikaans representation is that online we don't see too many colored speakers, and they're actually the majority of Afrikaans speakers.
Yeah, so that's where I was going. a bit more than 50%, I think, like 55% of
It's like a
Afrikaans
plurality,
speakers.
right?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
Like a plurality, like a small majority, I guess.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So they're colored, and it's these sentiments. I think they mainly where I see online is mainly white South Africans who complain about this. Um, well, maybe it's not just the white people complaining, but they do complain. And I think these people from Cape Town who mix much more, their language is not really embraced as really as part of Afrikaans. As yes, you are also welcome. Um, so on one hand, they are worried that their language is going to get replaced, but then there are also varieties of Afrikaans which are indeed very influenced by English, and really there's a lot of interplay with English and code switching. And these people are not welcome then.
Yeah, there's this sort of myth I've noticed among Afrikaans speakers, that Afrikaans is relatively uniform, and that could not be further from the truth. There's actually there's a lot of dialectal variation.
Yeah,
People from out east, their long ah sound is sort of rounded. It's an o, and
really rounded. Yes, yes.
they don't say ek, they say ak, and
Yeah,
um, there's the creolized varieties like the Basters, the Griqua, who they've inherited some features from like the Khoisan languages, like the hoot pluralizer. So hoot in
oh
this
yeah,
case is a thing,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
like a spielhoot. And there's actually a lot of variation, and that's not even getting into the varieties in Namibia. That's just within South Africa.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely that's very true. So, yeah, of course, those dialects, I think people just don't think about them at all, because those people are very in rural areas and they are not very visible. So then the opinions are not that strong about them either.
Right. And they're
Yeah,
also not the prestige variety. The prestige
yeah,
variety of Afrikaans is definitely sort of this Transvaal white Afrikaner
yeah,
variety.
with a bit of a long A rounding, and yeah,
Mhm.
and definitely an alveolar trill as the R.
Mhm.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for anyone listening, I do have to say though, Afrikaans is a great language to whet your teeth on. If you're an English speaker or a Dutch speaker and you've never learned another language, probably doesn't apply to many Dutch people because Dutch people, I think, learn German and English in school.
yeah.
Um, but as an English speaker, I was about 16 years old, so this would have been almost 14 years ago. I tried to learn Japanese. I did okay. I took it in school, but I didn't really do great on my own. And I ordered some textbooks meant for school um, from Kalahari.net, it's sort of like it used to be the Amazon of South Africa. And
Hmm.
I wet my teeth on it. It was nice. Doesn't have gender. It has like 8 irregular verbs.
Of which you
Conjugation.
need to use 5. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, there's basically no conjugation beyond present and past. So
yeah.
definitely was a very friendly language to get started on. And as a Southerner, I do have to say, for better or worse, the sort of culture, the Afrikaner culture, is very familiar to me. Tends to be rural, tends to be large farms. A lot of Afrikaner music kind of sounds like Southern music or country music.
Yeah,
And I found it a very gentle introduction into language learning. Um, so,
yeah. I would really recommend anyone who likes just learning languages for the sake of it.
and it has a lot of
Take a
features
look
I
at it.
just love. I love the reduplication in it because you don't see that in in standard average European languages too much, like English or Dutch. Like here and
Mhm.
there, they say plek plek, and um, the diminutives are great.
Yeah,
Everything's everything's diminutive in Afrikaans, blinky for bean, right?
We do that even
Uh,
more in Dutch. Yeah, but yes, the diminutives, you almost don't have them in English. Nothing productive. So yeah,
mhm.
just learning about diminutives in the first place is really fun. Yeah, yeah,
Now,
yeah.
to shift gears here a little bit, because we've been talking about what I want to talk about, which is definitely sort of the Low Franconian Afrikaans, Low Saxon stuff. But I feel like a lot of people are going to be interested in your background with sort of compline. Do you want to talk about that? I don't know very much, but it sounds to me like you've worked with and you've studied things like language models, things like ChatGPT.
Yeah. So at first when I went to study, I studied physics because that's what I did very well in high school. Yeah,
And
kind of,
the Dutch education system has multiple streams, right?
yes. Yeah, well, kind of levels of theoreticalness or something. Yeah, and then I started in one where you wouldn't even be able to go to university. Well, you can go to what's called an applied university, which is you can get a bachelor's degree but no master's degree, and no, you cannot stay in academia. And it's more applied. That's why it's called an applied university. And then I did really well there in these more theoretical courses like mathematics and physics and well, also in German class, but I never really noticed. And then so then I went to a higher level of high school, and I kept doing well in these courses. So it made sense to also, considering the job opportunities, to study physics. And then, but I always liked languages, just in general. It was a fun thing to spend your time on. And I had a friend who studied physics as well. So when we were in university, and his mom's from Peru, and she speaks Quechua. Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
I was muted. I was just thinking out loud. That's fantastic. I recently interviewed a high level Quechua learner. So very cool.
Yes. So then she raised her son in Spanish and Dutch. He grew up here with a Peruvian mom, but Spanish was also kind of her first language, even though a lot of her family does speak Quechua. So yeah, that made more sense. But then, so my friend discovered that there was this structure course on a non-Western language. There are multiple of these courses in the linguistics bachelor's degree in Leiden. And this one was about Quechua, and he thought, well, seems fun to do this course as an elective, as an extracurricular elective, to connect with his heritage. He knew that I liked languages, and I heard that he wasn't going to do it. So, well, then I decided to just follow it with him. And, well, he really enjoyed the course, but I really enjoyed this course. I just loved this analytical approach of looking at a language, and a language that's so different from anything I knew. Because at that
What
point,
language do you guys look at, by the way?
the language was Quechua.
Okay, it was Quechua.
Yes. So that's why he was so motivated to follow it, because it's his heritage. But then I just thought, well, why not do an extracurricular course? There's no downside to this. Why not? It's just so I at that point I knew about languages like Dutch, German, English, French, Spanish, the common ones in Europe. I knew something about them. I did Italian on Duolingo, and sure, you find interesting things there. Even within Europe, even within the Netherlands, the dialects have some super interesting grammatical quirks. But if you go to a different continent, So I was just amazed, and I thought, I have to do this whole bachelor. I have to do it. So I did. But then you come from a physics background, and I felt like I need to justify doing this other thing here and maybe get a job with it. So I should go for the more technical side. And, well, surprise, surprise, I really like the technical side, the more programmy side and of linguistics.
And do you want to talk about that? So I feel like language enthusiasts tend to know a little bit about like maybe surface level stuff like phonology, maybe some historical linguistics. People love to read about sound changes and etymology and stuff. But when it comes to things like, well, anything sort of complang, I think that a lot of us, including me, don't really know much about it. You know, we might vaguely know that there are language models like ChatGPT and stuff, but there's also other things being done. Do you want to explain that to us?
Well, yeah, I would like to say something about ChatGPT.
Sure.
Because, you know, sometimes... So in November, ChatGPT blew up in the media. Suddenly this thing was released where you can just input anything and something sensible often comes out. And a bit earlier already, there was this Google employee who got fired because he believed his neural network got sentient. I don't know if you heard about this.
I vaguely remember hearing about that, yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to declare these things are not sentient. They don't even do anything until you input something. Nothing happens. If you just open the website, nothing's happening. Obviously, it cannot talk by itself. It can only... So how these things are made is they're based on statistical text prediction. That's the basis of large language models. So originally they were just designed that you input a text and then it predicts what the next text will be. And then people started finding out that if you kind of rephrase the input in such a way that it's like a question answer thing or something, then like if you give a question and an answer and a question and an answer a few times, then it's really likely that this pattern will continue. So the text prediction will give questions and answers. So if you finish your message with a question, it will fill in an answer just based on what is statistically likely in that context. Often that was already sensible. And then they started fine-tuning them. So you don't need this weird format casting it as a completion task. So now you can just put in anything, but it's still just statistics, and it doesn't know anything about semantics, anything about phonology, anything about syntax, about any structure of language. Any knowledge it has is kind of emergent from just reading the whole internet and more.
So why do language models like ChatGPT lie? You can ask it something, and it will give you a very convincing answer, whether it's true or not.
Well, so because it's likely to say something like that, given that context. It doesn't know about true or false, doesn't know anything. It's only predicting what would be sensible to respond, what would be likely to respond. It has no sense. I said sensible, but yeah. So it can easily lie. And if something is well known, then it's very likely that that's to respond to that. Like how much is 1 + 1? It's very well known what the answer is. But if you get into like detailed questions, things that are complicated, very nuanced, and that have no clear answer easily findable on the internet yet, then it needs to kind of interpolate from the things that you provide in your input. So like, I don't know, if you ask for reduplication in Afrikaans, it's relatively well known. But if it's not a super big topic, so to some degree, it will just go for the context of Afrikaans and what's statistically likely to say there, and the context of reduplication, and then some kind of statistical interpolation happens, and maybe that's sensible. Sometimes it is, and if you're talking about some kind of style transfer, this works very well. Like, do this in the style of that. That's also the same interpolation happens, and then usually, because it's just an aesthetics an aesthetic thing, then something sensible comes out, and we are satisfied with the result. But if it's about facts, this same interpolation needs to. We are not satisfied with a similar trick.
Right. And I've definitely seen my coworkers using that. I have a coworker, and she and I, we have to write tickets in Spanish. So when somebody submits something to the website, to our company website, I would say half, maybe 60% of tickets come in Spanish. And she's always nervous about her formality, right? Sort of in your L2, it can be tricky to get the register right. You can be understood and be pretty good at a language, but unless you've lived there and done a lot of interaction with the language, sometimes register can just be tricky. And she will frequently write something in Spanish and have ChatGPT change the register, and then she'll send it off because she's just worried about coming across as rude. And I think that sort of tracks with what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, I guess you mentioned to me that you sort of study ChatGPT and language models' ability to make grammaticality judgments. How does that work?
Yeah, well, so regardless of what these things know, what's like inherent to, like, what's inside the black box, you can also just ask, what can it do? So is this thing able to help a linguist with some kind of syntactical problems describing the grammar of some language or something like that? Well, that's a question that has not been researched very much yet. Like, of course, all kinds of this is just one question you can ask about anything. Can ChatGPT do this or help me with this? And it's quite a recent thing, like half a year old. Well, it's not half a year old, but it's half a year ago that it really blew up. So so for my master's thesis, I am currently looking at how ChatGPT and a few other large language models handle or deal with ungrammatical sentences. So then the question is, first of all, can they recognize them at all? Can they spot them? Then can they repair them? Like, if I give it a sentence that's wrong, can it repair it? And can it also, and that's much harder, can it explain what's wrong and why that's wrong? So there was kind of a problem that at this point in it's just a master's research project, so I have no money or something, so I cannot use a supercomputer, so I cannot access all the publicly available very large language models. We do, however, have like very high-end consumer PCs with like 64 gigabytes of memory and stuff like that. So I can get models that can do something, but it's really not a factor of 10 off, at least from ChatGPT. And those models so a model big enough to run on a good consumer PC can really not explain anything unless you really tell it what to say, basically.
Okay, so at present, the publicly available language models do not explain grammaticality very well. They cannot make those judgments yet.
No. Well, so ChatGPT usually gives a list of bullet points of things that are wrong with a sentence that you give it, and then one of them is indeed the thing that I want to hear. That's what it typically does. So I have a list of about 1,000 sentences, and they're grouped. So I have about 130 different types of ungrammatical sentences where different things are wrong.
Now, when you say ungrammatical, what do you mean by that? Because, like you, I also speak a regionally tinted variation of a language. So where I'm from, we can stack modal verbs. So growing up, I would say, you might ought to go to the store, or I might could do that for you, Tom. And we can stack 2, sometimes 3 modals: may, can, should, might, ought, so
Yeah.
on and so forth. And that's sort of a Southern English thing, Greater Appalachian region.
I've heard it before. It's I like it. I
also
want to
like
do
it.
this too. But yes. So So the list that I use is from a paper that already, for a different reason, needed all kinds of ungrammatical sentences. And I thought it was nice that they needed it for a very different reason, because then the research has not been done before. And also these models cannot already have been trained on this list of ungrammatical sentences. So yeah, seemed like a good idea. So this is indeed a problem with the list, is that the sentences are collected from a journal called Linguistic Inquiries, from all kinds of different papers. And of course, all these different papers do not describe the exact same variety of English. So there is some kind of vague general English that this applies to.
Yeah, as an American who is very international, I guess. I've lived in a couple of different countries, and I'm very chronically online. So I interact with a lot of people who are not American and not my type of American. I have gotten very hesitant to make grammaticality judgments in English, because what's grammatical for me might not be for another person, and what's grammatical for another person might not be grammatical for me.
Yes.
So my question is what are they basing grammaticality on here? Is it like, do any, would any L1 speaker of English have this grammatical, or would it be something that goes against the vague, sort of fuzzy notion of standard English?
So since these sentences are from different papers, every paper might have a bit of a different approach, but in general, they all ask speakers who are not hesitant to judge, is this all right, or is something wrong with this sentence? Would you consider this acceptable or not? That's usually just a question like that. And for most of these sentences, it's very clear. Like the first sentence on the list is, Sarah saw pictures of. That's just an unfinished sentence.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not so, and I don't think there is an English variety where this is fine, where this means anything. Even though there are certainly other languages where pictures of is a way to express a bunch of pictures, something like that. But there are also sentences here that I have left out in my research because they are labeled in the dataset already as questionable. For example, let's see. Betty convinced Fred to have washed the car. So I'm not a native English speaker, so this sounds completely fine to me. But what they say here, no, it should be Betty convinced Fred that he would wash the car instead of to have washed the car.
Okay.
Betty convinced Fred to. What do you think?
I can't comment on that.
You should just be a bit harsh and say it's wrong or it's fine. You're a native.
Yeah, I am a native, but I sort of subscribe to the idea of what is a native. What we all have different opinions on what is correct and what is not correct. Um, and I consider myself fairly descriptivist when it comes to these things. But even I occasionally have like I can feel the descriptivist like leaving my body occasionally. Um, Certain things really irk me, like people saying the T and often just really just for some reason grinds my gears. And
Yeah.
um,
What
I
about the
definitely
L in salmon?
the Ellen salmon. Not a huge fan. It's pretty common in the South for this sort of spelling pronunciation. Also, in like the word palm, people will say palm instead of palm.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm not super big on spelling pronunciations as a rule.
yeah,
Um,
of course.
but yeah, I'm not sure. I had a boss from Indiana like 7 or 8 years ago, and she would say things like the shelves need cleaned, the car
Ah,
needs washed.
okay, yeah, yeah.
Um, so again, when it comes to that, I'm just not sure. I don't want to make a call. Would I probably say that? No, I would not say what your example sentence has. But
Mhm.
I can't speak for other people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and that's totally reasonable. And of course, this I picked this sentence because it's marked as dubious. So, so I really enjoy that you're not willing to judge it. Whereas, yeah, what was it? Sarah saw pictures of is very clear cut. It's
I would
just,
judge that. Yes, I would say
yeah,
that's not grammatical.
yeah. But there are also a few sentences in here. Um, there are things like John flattered Mary while insulting herself.
Okay,
What's
is
going
that one
on
labeled
here?
as dubious? It
No,
must be. No, it's
it's
not.
it's labeled as ungrammatical.
John flattered Mary while insulting herself. It feels like they've dropped the she, maybe, while she was
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
insulting
yeah. That's
herself.
that's a nice way to put it. Yeah. So there's a subject missing, or something is going wrong with the
But I,
subject.
I, I feel like colloquial English sometimes drops the subject.
But in this sentence too.
Maybe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like I said, I feel like my ability to make judgment calls on grammaticality has just totally gone out the window. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, mine too. If I read these sentences, at some point they all seem fine to me. All the ungrammatical ones. If you stare at them long enough, you get used to them. Uh,
oh yeah, and I mean, especially because so I, as an international person, as we're online. Um, Obviously, the Netherlands is very international. We run into a lot of varieties of English,
yeah.
and at some point, they just sound normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
you get used to things. You get used to how Dutch people speak English. You get used to how Filipinos speak English. You get used to how Indians speak English, and
Yeah.
after a certain point, it sounds wrong. It sounds fine. You know, if I hear a Filipino say, "Will you cook me?" I understand. Okay, will you cook for me? Is what they're saying. Would
Yeah.
I say it? No. But if you hear it enough, if you live in the Philippines or whatever, um, eventually it sounds normal, I guess.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I've spoken English with a lot of Germans, and then any Dutchism is basically also a Germanism. So at some point, your English starts as like what you learned in school, but if you talk for an hour, at some point there's really something left that's not
I've
considered. Yeah,
I've touched on this in other podcast episodes, particularly in Western and Central Europe, Germany, Austria. Um, I'm not sure how strongly native speakerism is a thing for a lot of these Europeans, where like there's this international English that people just use and understand, right? if a Dutch person says to a German person that the beamer is broken, they both know what they're talking about. I would not call anything a beamer,
Oh,
but
that's beautiful. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
a Dutch person, a German person would be like, "Oh yeah, the projector, it's been broken for 2
I would
days."
100% call it a beamer.
And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's sort of like this new-ish, it's its own variant of English, right? That's got its
Hmm.
own sort of internal agreements that I, as an American, am not part of. And I think it's very interesting to see sort of English divorced from native speaker contexts like that, where a German and a Dutch person are using English and they've got their own variety of English.
Hmm. Yeah. And so to come back to my research, so judging is very difficult, but people manage to do it. And I'm very glad that I have a list of pre-judged sentences, so I don't have to do the very impossible task of determining whether, especially considering that I only started learning English like when I was 12, 13.
Interesting. Is that typical for a Dutch person?
Yeah, well, you learn a bit in primary school, but that's really nothing useful. And then in high school, when you're 11 or 12, yeah, then it really starts.
I do have to say, um, Dutch, Low Saxon, and when I say Dutch, all Low Franconian languages, they have a special place in my heart. They just feel
Uh,
like English. Like it feels like English's brother that was raised by a different family, but they're still basically the same at the end of the
yeah,
day.
it really is. But what do you think about Norwegian then? People often say that's the easiest language to learn if you're English.
I don't know. I don't know much. I feel like it's different in some ways. I feel like we do share a lot of vocab. And, that sort of jumps out to me. Like tree and tre
Yeah,
are much closer than tree and boom. But
yeah,
if you look under the hood, tree also exists in Dutch, right? It's pronounced tier, and you usually see it in like apple tier and stuff, like compound words. And
yeah.
Dutch word
I don't
order
know.
is quite different. I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe Norwegian might be a little bit closer, more solidly SVO without all the V2 stuff going on in Dutch and German. But
Yeah.
it just feels normal, and I've always thought this when I look at German, it always feels one step removed. English fight, Dutch vechten, German kämpfen, English floor, Dutch floor, German Boden, right? It
Yeah,
just it
yeah, yeah.
it always feels one step removed. Like they do have floor in German as a cognate, but it doesn't mean floor. I think
Yeah.
it's like hallway or something. FLUHR.
And now I'm wondering if fechten is not always also German.
It
It
might be. I'm
feels
not
like a
sure.
German word. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get Afrikaans with Omte Bakley from
The baklei. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's also Dutch, but not to fight,
no.
but more like to bicker.
Gotcha. But yeah, definitely. So it's very interesting to me. If I could
Hmm.
pick your brain on what it would be like to be do, do you remember what it was like to not speak English? Because obviously Dutchies are usually sort of famous for their English ability.
Yeah,
Um,
I do. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I remember at some point when I was like 7, there was this girl who was kind of a show off, and she was like, "Yeah, I know English words," and I'm like, "I also know English words," and I didn't know, couldn't come up with any English word at all. Um, and then at some point on my bag, I saw the word. I saw something like, I don't know what it was, but I saw the word "or." I thought, "Yeah, or that's a word. That's an English word." And she was like, "Okay, fine. What does it mean?" I didn't know. So I had no idea. I just read the word. So yeah, and there was this time where, yeah, there was media that was just you didn't listen to it because the sound didn't make sense. You just read the subtitles. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I oftentimes wish that the Dutch were more internationally. I don't know how to say it without sounding rude. Relevant. Like it's a very nice language. Reminds me a lot of English, but Dutch people all speak English. Flemish people speak pretty good English. I feel like even Surinamese people speak English. Uh,
Well, speaking English, yes. I don't
there's
know
not the
about.
utility that you have. If you go
Yes,
to
yes,
Mexico, you need Spanish. Whereas if
yes.
I go and visit the Netherlands, I imagine I could get by in
Yes, you
English.
can definitely get by, and in the Netherlands, everywhere, and in Belgium, the Dutch part of Belgium,
Flanders.
mhm, the same. I think you can get by, but if you're gonna live there and you really wanna make friends, meet your neighbors, and have a real conversation, like how we are talking right now. Also in the Netherlands, you cannot talk with people like this, not with everyone. The people who you find on the English internet are the people who speak English very well. So, but of course, yes, you can ask for directions, ask about explanation in a restaurant. Does this contain meat? How much does it cost? Um, is this is this a dessert or a main dish? Uh, yeah, you can get by completely if you're just on vacation in the Netherlands. You do not need Dutch.
Mhm.
That's true. But if you're gonna live there and you wanna become part of the Netherlands, then I would
It,
still say
I
yes.
imagine like if you're a non-European immigrant, I think it's required. Like if I were to move to the Netherlands, I think the government would require me to at least be A2, like
Oh
survival
yeah,
level.
I don't know about that, but I think so. Yeah, we have something called an inburgeringsexamen, and in
And that's another
yeah,
example. I just love it. I love how, like in burgenings, like a burger, it just,
citizen.
a citizen, right? I love how Dutch does not shy away from using native roots where English would use, French or Latin. It gives Dutch a
Oh,
very,
we
it
do
makes it
not
sound very cute.
we
It
do
makes it
not
sound very
shy
cute.
away from using Romance or Greek words either.
True, true. But sometimes it just sounds very cute hearing,
Hmm.
what English could have sounded like,
Yeah, yeah,
had,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Tom, we're about at time. We got a couple more minutes here. Before we go, two questions. One, is there anything you would like to say that I didn't give you a chance to say? And two, what would your parting words of wisdom be? Um,
Okay, that's difficult. My parting words of wisdom. Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah. I
have
have
thrown
I
you
have
a
a nice
couple of
quote.
hardballs. Okay.
I have a nice quote. Um, Maybe it's cheesy, but I think it needs to be said. I've heard a lot of talk about ugly languages, but I've never heard an ugly language. It's just not true that languages are ugly, ever.
Okay. I can agree with that. But I think some people sometimes have, there's the concept of phonoaesthetics, right?
Yeah.
So maybe Dutch gets caught up in this because obviously "h" is a very common sound.
Yeah, I'm from the south, so I don't have this sound. So, but yes, Dutch gets told. Yeah, it's how do you say that? It's very often people say, yeah, Dutch is this sounding language. It's ugly and it's harsh and
I have to say, I think Dutch is the cutest thing. The all the diminutives, all of the Germanic words where we would use a French word, it makes it sound awesome. So I agree. I think you're right. There's no such thing as an ugly language. Um, and anything that you wanted to mention that I didn't get to talk about or that you didn't get to talk about, we didn't get into Pratt and all
no,
this other cool
I think we
stuff.
can talk for hours. um, yeah, I don't know, nothing specific.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Oh,
Tom, thank you for
well,
coming. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Um, these large language models have not finished developing. They will still get much better. It's not like, they don't understand anything about syntax and they never will. That's not true. At some point, the prediction stuff and the interpolation will get so good that it's going to get really useful for a lot of science, or at least I think so. Reasoning will be some kind of emergent property in these things in I think like 10 years maybe. That's something I wanted to say.
They're in their infancy, basically.
Yes, and their infancy is already pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, I have not adopted ChatGPT or any of these language models. I know a lot of my coworkers talk to ChatGPT, but I've always been skeptical, unfortunately. So, it's always a helpful reminder that these are still in their infancy and they will get better.
Yeah, and their infancy can already help you code and translate things very well, rephrase things in different styles. It can already do all kinds of things. It's the infancy.
I should use it more often. It's what everybody
try it out.
telling me. All right, and Tom, again, thank you for coming on. It was a very interesting episode, and maybe I'll see you around in the future.
Sure. Thank you.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Refold Podcast. If you're watching the live premiere, you're in luck. Right as it ends, we have an after party over on the Refold Central Discord server. Come join us by using refold.link/join to chat about the episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear more, you can find older episodes to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. Let us know what you thought about the video by liking and leaving a comment below. Do you have suggestions for upcoming visitors or requests for particular topics? Please feel free to reach out to me on Discord at GeorgePig #5413 or via email at Clayton@refold.la. Thank you all for watching and or listening, and I'll see you next week.